and welcome back to the What the Falk Sunderland preview podcast ahead of this weekend's game against Swansea City. As sometimes happens, we didn't do a preview or probably won't do a review for the midweek game against Norwich City, so I've got absolutely no idea if you're going to be happy or sad listening to this, but I very much hope that you are the former. If not though, don't worry, there's only a few more days until we can fix it as we welcome Swansea City to the Stadium Light on Saturday, and to join me, as always, is Luke from the SwanCast. Luke, how are you, mate? You doing well? It feels like it hasn't been that long, but at the same time, ages.
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Nice that the sun is starting to shine a little bit more now in the evening, isn't it? So summer's on its way. The weather's been all right. So yeah, feeling okay.
Even in Glasgow, it's sunny. It's
Yeah,
like the sun's been, yeah, it's been really nice. I've actually gone for a
that's it.
walk.
No, that's it for the summer probably. So we'll have it now Easter, and then that's it.
Yeah, we'll be done soon, especially in Glasgow. It just doesn't last much longer than about 3 days. But look,
Yeah.
I feel like I've said this with every guest over the past few weeks. I think it's just modern day football. So much to get into, but we'll start from the top. You play a day later than us, so one day less rest. You play Plymouth on Wednesday, so the last game to speak of is Derby. I didn't watch the highlights, but I read the stats. You had three shots. Derby had 12. They scored. You scored with your only shot on target. They only actually had two shots on target as well. But look, stats on everything because you were far superior in the possession stats. So how was the performance? Because it's hard to decipher from the statistics, if I'm honest.
It was quite dull to be honest, but I think there's a lot of context around the game that this time of the season does affect the performances at both ends of the pitch. We recently went to Leeds and got a point there. Leeds also drew their last game, so people are saying the Leeds falling off a little bit now going into the end of the season when it looked like they were very easily going to win the league. And I guess it's the same down the other end. We got Derby, who before this game won four in a row, and they come to us. And as much as we had a bit of a cushion to relegation or the bottom clubs, Derby being one of those teams that's down there, winning that game has the potential to pull us back in, especially when you've just mentioned we've got Plymouth in a, well, as speaking, Plymouth is our next game. By the time this is out, probably would have had a result in that one. But ultimately, if we were to lose Derby and Plymouth, we could be in that mix again. So there's a lot of importance around that game, probably more so for them because they just came out. I think the weekend before they got themselves out, but it's a case of staying out. But yeah, we managed to get the win, and I think it was just a case of getting the job done the best you can. I do think we got set up in a way to try and make sure we didn't lose the game, which a lot of fans perhaps don't want to see at home. But I think at this stage of the season, we've changed manager, we've got a caretaker manager in charge. Obviously, in the summer when we reset, and perhaps whether Alan Sheehan stays on and gets given the job full time, or whether it's a new manager altogether, maybe then we look at more the performances and what we're doing on the pitch. Like, what is the style again? But I think his job at the moment is to see us through the season in the best way possible and to make sure we're well clear of any threat of going down. And I think seeing 3 points against Derby has gone a massive way to doing that. I'd be surprised now if we're really in that conversation, to be honest. So, yeah, performance not great, but I think important that we got the result, however we got it, and they did the job at the end of the day. So, yeah, credit to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and we'll get into it further, but where you are on the table, you could have got sucked into it. I don't think you're going to now. I think even a point probably would have been okay. But look, it's been a strange little season for Swansea, really, in the sense that you've done nothing, but lots of things have happened. If that's not too rude to say, I don't really know what to make of you. You're 15th at the time of speaking, but it's tight in between that middle of the table. You could probably jump up to 10th and stuff like that. You sacked Luke Williams in February after. I mean, you'll be able to tell me more, but it felt like an uninspiring, not a terrible, not a fantastic 30-month spell in charge. But we'll get on to the caretaker manager, and I think a lot of the conversation is going to be about what happens in the future for Swansea because there's not much that can happen for the rest of the season from what I can see. But could you run us through, the Luke Williams time, the 30 months he had, why it came to an end when it did, and I suppose how you look back on his time in charge because he came very highly rated, had that very famous corner kick interview beforehand that everyone loved, but turns out he wasn't that much of a genius at short corners.
Yeah, it's just disappointing. Like, I don't think, like, no one hates the time, I don't think, under him, but no one perhaps loves it either. And the way that it fizzled out was a bit mediocre, disappointing, like frustrating. Basically, he came in last season, January, I think it was, or late December, pretty much January. And he was tasked to kind of bring back a passing style of football that we perhaps lost a bit under Michael Duff after moving on from Russell Martin. So more going back to what we were doing under Russell Martin, though we didn't get quite to the same way. Nick Williams came and said, he actually said in one of his first interviews that, I'll score more goals than Russell Martin's style of football. I don't think that ever came to fruition. Not really sure why, but the defense has been a bit leaky really since Russell Martin. Actually, the Duff couldn't really fix it. I think that was his primary goal, and then Luke Williams came in, and I think a lot of his period was trying to find a balance for being good going forward, but also solid at the back. And there's been periods where it's too much one way or the other. And it did, to be fair, feel going into maybe December by Christmas that, well, this season in general, he had a season to build. That was his first full season. He got some signings in the summer. It was a bit of a slow start, up and down. I was concerned some of the problems we had last season weren't addressed in the summer when I was watching our early season games in like August and September. I was getting a bit frustrated that some of the easy wins that you'd think he could have fixed in the summer with a bit of a training camp with the squad was still shining through. But he did adjust things and it did get better, to be fair to him. There was a period of like 9 hours where we didn't score a goal, where I think he over-addressed the defensive issues. But I say over-addressed. Our defence was good, to be fair, the first half of the season. We should have conceded a lot more goals than we did in the first 10 games. We got a bit lucky quite often. But then it did actually start getting quite solid. We actually didn't lose a game in the first half of the season by more than one goal at all in the league. So that's that means as much as you don't always get the results you want or deserve, you're competitive in every game. If you're only losing by maximum of one goal, there's always a chance that you can steal a point or steal a win. And we did that sometimes, and obviously sometimes we lost a win and they went to a draw, and the same vice versa. But that's a good foundation to build on. And going into Christmas, it did seem that we were maybe having momentum going the right way. There was good wins at home, 3-0, I think it was, against QPR, and 2-1 against Luton. As much as it's not a big score line, I think the performances there were quite solid, quite really good. And at that time, people started asking us, like, are we in the playoff hunt? Can we start looking up? I think we were only 4 points off. And we were flirting, like, in that period, 8th to sort of 12th, 13th, I think, all the first half of the season. Just on the cusp of being in a conversation. But it looked like maybe the form was just about to send us properly into that conversation. And then he got linked with a job to West Brom. I moved to West Brom and got asked about that after those games at Christmas time. And he didn't shut them down. If anything, people use the term he kind of flirted with West Brom a little bit in the media, the way that he spoke about it. And it just fell off a cliff. I literally, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. But the next game, which was away to Portsmouth on New Year's Day, which starts a bad run of form, literally 2025, 4-0 defeat against Portsmouth away from home. Bear in mind what I just told you about not losing a game by more than one goal all season. Right, and okay, you can say, okay, New Year's Day, bit of a one-off. Maybe it's, whatever, it happens sometimes. But several games in January, we've lost by multiple goals, then competitive performances was bad. Like, going from those 2 wins I just mentioned against QPR and Luton, and before that even, I believe we played yourselves and had a really good game. I think you had the perhaps strong second half, but we were in that game for a lot of it. And Leeds, we competed against as well, and I think we lost 4-3 with like our last bit. We were competing against teams that were flying at the time, and perhaps we didn't think we were going to beat, but scoring 3 goals, even if you're at home against Leeds and losing 4-3, like, you can see the positives there, I think, and ultimately just fell apart in January. I can't put my finger on it other than the fact that he's got linked to this job. I believe what happened was he did want to go for whatever reasons. I don't know the ins and outs of why that was. He thought he was going to go. Apparently there was talks, and he was quite high up on the list. Was under the impression he was going. I believe, and this is rumor, I've not got 100% confirmation, that he told some of his coaching team they were going, essentially. West Brom's side then didn't like the fact that he'd done that off a verbal agreement, and the reaction of their fans to the fact that he was basically getting the job, because that's what it did sound like everywhere at the time. And then they backed out, essentially. And it was quite funny because I think we were recording a podcast and it just came out in unison, just as we were about to record, from all these West Brom journalists at the same time, within the same hour, they were like, Luke Williams is no longer in the frame. The club's gone a different direction. As if it was an organized, like, yeah, we need to distance ourselves from this a little bit. And we actually were playing them in the next game, which was like 2 days after this. So you can imagine how awkward that was. We actually got a point. We got a draw there. Last minute header from Joe Allen, which I don't know how that happened. We should have lost that game. Um, but yeah, unbelievably bad form after that. I think it was 7 losses in 9. One win away at Bristol City, which was a bit of a false dawn. Maybe we thought like, oh, maybe he's turned it around, but no, we're back to bad after that. And like I said, it wasn't just the defeats and the results, but the performances were just, it was hard to watch a little bit. And that wasn't what you were seeing before. So there was a lot of people saying like, we haven't spent in January, we've sold Matt Grimes, we've got all this, that, the other. And it's like, I'd like to just remind them the form started on the 1st of January. So none of that is an excuse. He didn't get sacked after a bad month of February and then sacked halfway through March, where you can say teams are strengthened and we didn't. The 7 losses in 9, most of them came in January. So you can't say the window is an excuse for that. He's working with the same squad of players. They got him 4 points off the players in the first half of the season. Something changed and they weren't performing for him anymore. I know Matt Grimes left, but he left halfway through that bad of form, that run of form as well. And the one win actually came after he left. So it's easy to say that's an excuse. And I think for him, there was a bit of a like, perhaps bought him a bit of time. But I do think he should have perhaps gone a bit sooner than he did. Ultimately, I just think the way that he dealt with the West Brom speculation and what he basically said was, go and talk to my agent out loud. And then he was asked in the next match and again didn't brush it off. Like he didn't shut it down. I think we lost. That was after the Portsmouth game. And he basically said, oh, well, they're not going to want me now, are they, after seeing that? Like, you might want to go. I get that happens in football, right? I get it. I 100% understand it. And if he does end up going, whatever, it happens. But you just don't say the quiet part out loud sometimes. And that's what he seemed to do. So when West Brom pulled out of it, he had to go into a conference and apologize and basically was saying like, I know it was a joke that went wrong. I thought the fact that they were asking me if there was any interest, like I was surprised. I didn't think it was true. I thought it was all, and it's like, oh, mate. But then, do you know what I mean? And what I said at the time was like, if that is all true and it was a mistake and a joke and whatever, then ultimately the performances will come back, and if he hasn't lost the dressing room, like, and there's nothing. And we had Cardiff, I think it was the game after West Brom. And I was like, that's fine. Go to Cardiff, put a good shift in. Even if you don't get the win, you can tell from the performance what he's getting out of that squad and if that's had an impact. And we lost 3-0 and got battered. And it was horrible. And I said, I think before the game, I was like, if there's no performance there, he's got to go. Because I think if you can't get his team up for that one, clearly he's lost the team. And hindsight's wonderful and all of that. But I think when you get to mid-February and he's, when he does go. And if you look at the form we've had since he's gone, he had 3 wins. I think he's in 6 or 7. Three wins and 2 draws in 7 games, I think he's had. Instant reaction and kind of in line with the form we were showing first half of the season. So if we take away this spell of 9 games, or whatever it was before he got sacked, I firmly believe we would be still, I'm not saying we would get playoffs, but I think we'd be in the conversation going into the end of the season. Probably, I don't think we would get over the line based on our January business, but we would have been just outside, and that's a good platform for next year, which was always the aim this season. We just kind of decided to capitulate. So yeah, that's our season ruined in a month, basically.
Is it frustrating that, because I know we spoke about Russell Martin before, and I know kind of, I don't want to say he's had egg on his face. Actually, I used to really dislike Russell Martin, which is silly for a man I don't know. I actually quite like him these days.
I'm sure you said last time you didn't like him.
Yeah, I quite like him these days. I actually don't mind him so much. But he came across wrong, and I've listened to quite a few interviews with him. And actually, he's quite an intelligent guy, almost sort of too intelligent for idiots like myself and football fans like myself. But I feel like Russell Martin, when he was at Swansea, there was always a chance he was going to go to a job higher up the chain. Southampton's not that higher up the chain, in my personal opinion. Neither is West Brom, in my opinion. I think you could probably lump all clubs more or less. In fact, you've won something they haven't, those two clubs.
I think it comes down to money these days. Like this was the conversation when Williams was getting linked, and for added context, I said we played West Brom, and just after that came out. At the time of that match, we were 1 position below them, I think they were seventh and we were eighth or something like that, or eighth and ninth. And I think it was 3 points that separated us. So, or the time the rumor came out, maybe before the Portsmouth game I mentioned. So around that time anyway, we were literally neck and neck with them when this rumor first came out. So people were like, "Why he wants to go somewhere one place higher?" Like,
Mm,
which my view on it personally is it's all for finance. I agree with you what you're saying in terms of perhaps hierarchy in terms of achievement in recent memory anyway. But our club at the moment is not strong financially. I'm not saying we're like in trouble, but I think we've fallen. Now we've come down to the championship from Prem and had quite a few seasons after parachute payments. We've kind of fallen back to the level the club can naturally operate at,
hmm
which isn't great for even this league, really. Like, if you look at Swansea's history and size, we so probably technically, probably people would hate me saying this, right? If you're listening as a Swansea fan or recent Swansea fan, but we are still overachieving in the grand scheme of our club's history.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and our
uh,
catchment area and all of that. So, like, when it comes to what we can spend, is limited, and I think manager, he's come from League Two, probably got a good wage to come to us. And the next thing is like, oh, another club in the Championship who are going to consistently have the funds to battle for the top six, probably in West Brom. And if that's an opportunity, I guess that's what he's seeing. And I think it's just important to remember, perhaps, that loyalty in football is just kind of not there. Because he was only with us for, if he did go to West Brom, it would have been a year, January to January, and he wasn't exactly flying. He wasn't like, I think we were quite normal, perhaps where we should be for the squad that we had. So he was building something that in time could have gone somewhere good, don't get me wrong. And I think the sort of thing he wants to build takes time. But yeah, he wasn't flying for that sort of like promotion in himself, I don't think, personally.
that's one thing I was going to say before. Like, I know Russell Martin didn't get you in the playoffs, and you could say the success was give or take largely the same. But even when, quote unquote, I didn't really like Russell Martin, I felt like, okay, style of play. I think, he's kind of cutting his teeth at a higher level than he's been at before with MK Dons. I can kind of see, maybe he's potentially anchoring for a job that would be lower end Premiership as it was. He went to Southampton, got in the Premiership, and then, look, I don't think anyone could have resurrected the way Southampton were this season, just the way football financials work. And unfortunately, one of the reasons I'm probably falling out of love with football a little bit. But I didn't see Luke Williams as someone that was like a sought after manager. I didn't feel he did enough at Swansea to be courted in any way, shape, size, or form. Whereas, like, I kind of feel like Russell Martin did. I can't tell you why. I'm
Yeah,
totally looking from the outside looking in. That part must have been quite frustrating because I think you can understand. Like, I'll give you an example. Like Jordan Henderson cut his teeth at Sunderland, give us a good season and a bit, and then got moved to Liverpool. At the moment, there's a bit of frustration with Tommy Watson going to Brighton after playing 5 or 10 games. They both had very high potential as a young boy at Sunderland, but it was frustrating because it feels like one, in my personal opinion, hasn't really done anything, and one has, and one when they left, have a higher opinion of one than the other, and you can probably guess which way that falls. I feel like with Luke Williams, he didn't do enough to be courted by a team, quote unquote, higher up the chain.
no.
Does that rankle a bit?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why West Brom fans weren't sold on him coming because it was kind of
Yeah,
like, oh, okay, that's a bit like what's he done? That's like for us to go and get him
yeah.
mid if he's out of contract, maybe it's someone who you get, who's done a solid job. But to go buy him out in January, like I don't know, I agree with you. And also Russell Martin, I do agree, he's a very intelligent manager. He talks very well about his style of football, and I think that's perhaps where he differs from Luke Williams. Is I think Russell Martin is exceptional in the media. I
Yeah.
think top tier media manager for at least the level that he's been around, and I think that has a lot of influence as well on opinion and helps build a really good relationship like with his fan base. And you're not the first person that's told me you dislike him, and I think that all comes from that as well.
It
He
turned though. It
gets
definitely did turn. Like there
he gets
was
the fans under
a
him
point.
kind of on board, but riles up the opposition fans because of kind of what he's talking about, which you could argue is a good thing because maybe that helps the team perform and like I don't know, it's mind games and stuff. Maybe I don't know, but thing with Russell Martin, he did do very well, and I do think little bit perhaps more back and perhaps a bit more time, and he perhaps would have done a bit better at Swansea. And I think he was still finding his feet. You could clearly see when what he wanted to do worked, how good he was. But we should have gotten the playoffs our second season, and we didn't. I think I can't remember the amount of points we were out of it by the end, but like there was a period, and don't quote me on this, a few seasons ago now, 3 wins in 24 games, I think it was, from December, basically after the World Cup. There was a World Cup that year, I think. And Obafemi left in the summer, and no, in January after the World Cup because he threw his toys out the pram. And yeah, we didn't replace him. So then Russell Martin had a bit of a paddy himself. The fact that we didn't replace him, we recalled Morgan Whittaker from Plymouth. And to be fair, he was smashing it at Plymouth at the time. And I think the board were like, well, he's scoring for fun in League One. Maybe we don't need to rush to replace Obafemi. You can use this guy. But I think Martin didn't want to use this guy. So he threw his toys out the pram, had a paddy. He had a press conference that was like all the coaches and him sat him down on like February the 1st, like they've let us down, but we're going to carry on trying to do the best, basically. So got all the fans on board because you've just spoke out against the board. But like, I'm just not sure that was, in the grand scheme of things, the best thing to do. And then he went on that massive run, which included January, but I think it ended in sometime in March or basically there was a run of 7 games towards the end of the season, or 9 games, sorry, towards the end of the season. We won 7 and drew the other 2, which shot us back up the table. Before that, there was 24 games where we won 3. And I think all 3 of them were against teams that had a red card. So that's the period people forget. And he nearly lost his job in that period, understandably. But because of how well the end went, people forget that. But like that's the good and the bad then. The good was really good, and that end 9 games, we were beating anyone. We were on top form. Like if that continued into a season after, probably would have been up there in the league. But unfortunately, he didn't seem to be able to do that consistently with us anyway. You can argue with the strength of the squad, whatever. I'm sure that's what he would do. But for me, I just think he threw his toys out the pram, and that's when perhaps he decided he was going. And I think he did give his head a wobble a little bit because there was an interview at some time when he was like, you know, I think it was the first win after that bad period. But he was like, look, I knew that I perhaps switched off a bit and I've been down in the dumps and the players have been feeding off that energy and we haven't been playing well. We haven't been performing well. So I've got to take some of that responsibility. And I did appreciate that because he's kind of admitting that because of the disappointment of not having the backing in January, he hasn't been doing his job as well as he could and building the players up to still get the most out of them. And then he showed that he could have done that by winning 7 in 9 and drawing the other 2, unbeaten 9-game end of the season, which we fell too short in the end. But I think it was like with 4 points, we finished off the playoffs. So, and you're just thinking in that 24-game period, you just needed 4 points. Just needed 4 points. So like you've shot yourself in the foot there. We should have gotten the playoffs that season. Not to bang on about him too much, but yeah, I can understand why other clubs look at him because he sells what he does so well. But I think the bad is just what gets overlooked a little bit. I'm not really surprised to see him. I don't think Southampton maybe had the right squad for it, but that style of football in the Premier League, I'm not surprised that they've had such a poor season. Like a little bit glad that that isn't us because it
Mm.
would have been if we had gone up, like we would have been just as bad because I think it's good when you're in a league of opposition that's your level and you can make yourself look above. But I think when you're against tougher opposition these days, that style of football is falling flat on its face a little bit more often than not.
Yeah, just get picked apart, I think. I
Yeah,
think we did it to him last season under Tony Mowbray, beat Southampton 5-0, and like the amount of mistakes at the back that were just so easy
and
to
that's
pick
it,
off.
and that's it, and it's a catch-22, and that's the problem with Swansea at the moment. We're stuck in that. We want to play that way because of our success with it in our recent history.
Mm.
Struggle to move on and accept a different brand of football. But I don't know if that brand of football is the in thing at the moment in terms of what brings you success, unless you've got an abundance of resources to get the best. But even Man City, look at them now. Like, do you know what I mean? It's football changes.
Yeah, football grows, football moves, and I think people are more used to that style of football. But like when you look at Swansea, I always feel like Swansea were one of those clubs that not had a manager for like ages, but they'd have a steady manager for quite a while, like Potter, Cooper. Like they'd
Yeah,
move on. When they moved on to maybe a bigger club or a Premier League club or something like that, as they did. And Russell Martin, you could say maybe wasn't a bigger club, but a chance with more an immediate chance of promotion, which he got.
Yeah,
But after that kind of fairly steady time with managers, that only really moved if they went upwards. You've now had four managers in less than 4 years, if we're counting in Sheehan, who's actually had two caretaker spells in charge. How much of that has hindered Swansea's progress? Because, look, as a Sunderland fan, I know exactly what it's like to have 100 managers in 100 days, but it doesn't help things when it just stunts progress, and you end up with a lot of players from a lot of different managers and a lot of different playing styles, a lot of different thought processes, a lot of different ethoses. And it kind of just, for want of a better phrase and word, fucks stuff up a little bit.
yeah, no, you're right, and that's where we were really with. I think like Russell Martin, obviously he was 2 years with him, and he did implement a style, but it was different from Cooper, who was before him. Steve Cooper was far more rigid, you could say. And by the end of Steve Cooper's time, you had the Swansea fans being bored of his defensive football with 1-0 wins. And it's crazy because he got two playoff results. And a lot of Swansea fans don't have fond memories, which is it's just interesting. And then if you look at the general opinion on Russell Martin, it's like, on at least on social media, I think maybe if you look at fans that don't use social media so much, you might get a different perception, perhaps. If I guess maybe age demographic plays into that as well. But I think Russell Martin was definitely one that appealed to the younger audience. So when you look at social media reaction to it, gets that much more bigger, pleasurable attention, if you like, even though it was two mid-table finishes, far-fetched from what Cooper brought us. Then you had Duff, who I don't really know what his style of football was. I wasn't as impartial to it as a lot of people were. I was quite happy to give him a bit of time and change. He didn't help himself quite a lot because of the way he was in the media, and immediately broke any relationship with the fans because of some of the stuff he was saying. So then whatever happened on the pitch, because it wasn't what they wanted as well, it was just dead in the water. Do you know what I mean? So I do think whoever came after Martin was destined to fail, but he kind of brought in a lot of players to play his way, got sacked by November. And I guess Luke Williams then been left with that sort of squad. So he had a summer to transition it. A lot of them players that came in under Duff went, or half of them on loan. So like not even getting all the money back. And then we're trying to bring new players in and he's gone again. So I completely agree with you. I don't know who our manager would be in the summer. Alan Sheehan's in now and he doesn't really play the high possession football. You might have seen on against Derby, we had a high amount, but that's not the norm at the moment. I think Derby are more counter-attack based than they, so they'll probably play in a way that allowed us to do it. And we haven't forgot how to keep the ball. It's just not what we primarily looking to do under Sheehan. But he's having to use what's there, and it's expensive, and we can't afford to keep doing that. I think that's our biggest problem. It's not so much the fact that we have to keep transitioning it, is that we're doing that on a budget, and over time that just ekes away the squad. You know, the good players are harder to replace. And the wages you quite often give these players make it hard for them to move on then when you don't need them anymore. And we just keep making these mistakes, I think, quite too often. And we're giving whatever manager comes in a bit of a tough task. So they either excel or do a really good job and then get snapped up somewhere else, like you could say Russell Martin had, or they just don't end up doing enough and the cycle starts again. But it does feel a little bit like you're stuck a bit in limbo and no man's land. And to be fair, the trajectory at the moment is probably going the wrong way. And it does make you worry a little bit. I think every time you're kind of hovering around that battle down the bottom, it's like, if we don't sort ourselves out, we could be worse next year. And eventually, I think you end up going, don't you? So, yeah, not
Yeah,
great.
we've been there with the Premier League, saving ourselves every season from March onwards, and then all of a sudden, David Moyes is a thing. But I'm going to move away quickly from that and talk about good things with Sunderland before I make myself sad. We're also like planted in fourth. We're like kind of in a no man's land. We're too far from third, probably too far from the automatics, if I'm completely honest, and far too far ahead of fifth. So, like, look, it's a nice place to be. It's not like the worst abyss to be part of. I don't mind being stuck in fourth. Oh, what a shame. Better than being stuck in like 24th. But I feel like with Swansea, you saw the best and the worst of Sunderland this season. Like the best was, of course, the second half. That was everything that we're good about. Everything that's been good about the season. Like great midfield performance, like high press and ability to get the ball back. Everyone like playing free flowing football. That sort of first half was maybe Sunderland's not weakest performance of the season, but it was up there with like the weaker performances in terms of bullied a little bit, like no man's land, making our own mistakes and kind of not responding as quick as we should. But what have you made of Sunderland season as a far? Because I feel like you've probably the only team in the league that's seen as much as we have in like the course of a one game, if that makes sense this season.
Yeah, I've been impressed with Sunderland, to be honest. I think being stuck in the fourth, like you're probably going to finish there, aren't you? So
Yeah.
it's got to be seen as a really good season. I think you've got some really good young players in the squad, and maybe that's partly why there's a bit of inconsistency. But if you're going to be inconsistent and finish fourth, there's only the only way is up, really, isn't it? So, yeah, that game found it quite interesting. Actually, we obviously lost 3-2, and I think no one really probably thought we were going to win that game. Luke Williams was fuming after it, and he called players out.
I
That's
remember
probably the
that.
start of it going a bit weird. Do you see the comments?
Yeah, it was weird because it was like the comments he made as a Sunderland fan was like, "Oh, that's class to hear that." Like when he was saying like how high level we are, and to us we were like, "Ooh,
Yeah,
there's like a manager who could potentially maybe get his side in the playoffs to be top 10, and he's being so complimentary." But then the back of my head was like, if that's Reggie Slabreese commenting like another team, I'm wanting to rip his balls off. Do you know what I
I'm
mean?
just wondering how much like because that was the first weird one, and then there was a few more after. I think after that one, everyone was like, "Oh yeah, that's nice. He's trying to spur them on," and like he expects more, you know. But I think there's some other weird things afterwards. I think it was one where we came back and won against Luton, I think it was. Or it might not have been, but it was someone, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I didn't go into the no, it was the game after the Sunderland game," and he was like, "Oh yeah, I didn't do the team talk at half time this time. I let Matt Grimes do it," and it makes you think, well, that's weird as well. Like, did you switch him off that much with those comments that you said after the Sunderland game that you've let your captain do the team talk instead? I don't know, but he was very flattering about your team
Mm.
because I think he was basically saying we couldn't mix it. We were showing up we weren't at that level yet. I was quite impressed that we went in a half time ahead personally, and I was kind of expecting you to come out with the blocks flying in the second half, and I wasn't surprised that you ended up getting the win. Obviously, disappointing when you're leading at home, but like I said earlier, I was expecting a bit of a transitional above mid-table, below playoff season, and I think that performance showed exactly that. So, but yeah, Sunderland I've been very impressed with, to be honest. A little bit jealous because we were linked to that. Is it Mundle? Is it Mundle?
Yeah, out for the season now, I think, sadly.
Yeah, but he had a good start, didn't he? He was doing well at the
Great
beginning,
player.
and I do wonder what he could have brought to us if we had managed to get him over the line. But yeah, it's good to see him doing well. Shame that he's out, but definitely got some good talent there.
I wanted to ask him that sort of 3-2 win. There was some really, really good performances second half, like really good performances. Some of the 45-minute performances in that game. I won't mention the name because it'll might give the answer away to the question I'm going to ask. But there was some players that I felt had put in the best performance of the season in that 45-minute period. Who was the player that stood out for you most in the 3-2 win?
He asked me to remember quite far back. It's been a lot of well, it's Christmas been since then. A lot of
Yeah,
alcohol. Um, I'm always impressed with Bellingham when I watch.
yeah.
To be honest, I and he scored, didn't he? Did he get an
Mm.
assist as well?
Yeah, he
I
did.
believe
Yeah.
so. I think I picked him out before the game as a threat, and it's difficult because I think a couple of your forward players. You got who's the one that played in the centre attack in midfield? Is it Rig?
Oh, Riggy. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he had a decent game, and the other centre midfield. I think those three in the middle.
That's who I was going to pick out. Like for me, Daniel, Job, and Riggy that day, especially
Yeah,
Daniel and Job were both
and
superb.
I'm not saying the forward players didn't do a good job, but I think the difference was made the ones behind, and I think the counter attack and just like I don't know the way that you go from back to front sometimes so fast, but it's direct and accurate and like dangerous all the time. Um, and then yeah, just intelligent play in the midfield. It's good to watch, and I remember speaking to the other guys on the podcast, and they were saying like they weren't even disappointed enough to lose him because of how good quality wise you guys were in the second half. It was a case of like, you know, when you just accept to be beaten by the better team. Like obviously you're frustrated you couldn't hold on to the result, but you're also like, okay, but fair enough. And there was a lot of that feeling. So guess that's the nicest way to lose a game.
Yeah, I'll take it 100%. It's funny listening to it because I think when you're embroiled in a season and you've got these reactions to like every game, and I'm as guilty as anyone, you sometimes forget how good of a team Sunderland actually are this season. And it's
Yeah.
sometimes nice to do the preview shows because you're not the first to say that. And I think, there'll be hopefully 10 Sunderland fans like normal listening to this. So all 10 of you listen, like you do tune in every single week. Like I think it's something we should probably take a bit more notice of, that we are a bloody good team and we are in a bloody good position, and there's absolutely no reason we can't win the playoffs, which I think, if we don't end up in, it's going to be catastrophic, and it's going to have to be a hell of a fall from grace and a hell of a improvement in form from the teams in seventh, sixth and all that. But the one thing I'm worried about with Saturday, there's one team since we've come to the Championship that has a 100% record at the Stadium Light. It used to be Cardiff and Swansea. Bizarrely, turns out now that it's just Swansea because we beat Cardiff the other week, 2-1, sorry.
If you don't go up this season and Wrexham come up, is that going to continue?
I mean, it's worrying in the sense that there was three teams, I think, that had won two games at the Stadium Light. One's Hull, but they drew the first one 4-4, so they haven't got a 100% record. So Hull are the only ones unbeaten alongside Swansea, although Hull have played one extra game. Cardiff had won both their games, had shithoused a 1-0 win twice, but then we beat them 2-1, and probably the best performance they've put in.
That's Cardiff all over. That is Cardiff all over.
Yeah. I fancy us to break it, I'm going to be honest. Like, I feel
Yeah,
a bit
I
of
wouldn't.
momentum.
I wouldn't feel confident going to Sunderland, but I feel more confident that we'll put up a good display for ourselves now than I would have if you asked me when Luke Williams was in charge. Not the Luke Williams you played last time. If you played, if it was the same as that now, then it would be a different conversation. This whole video, but
Mm.
like since then, so like January when he got sacked, that period, right? If any team I was going to from January the 1st, let's say, I just didn't. I think we would be battling relegation if he didn't sack him. Let's say that. I'm not sure where we would get another win from. Now I do feel Sheehan has made us hard to beat again, and even going away to Leeds and drawing 2-2, and we weren't. That wasn't like a lucky 2-2. We weren't a bad. You know what I mean? It wasn't plucky or anything like that. Probably like Leeds were the better team, but I think we also deserve to get a point, if that makes sense. As the away team, as the underdog, we've done enough to justify that. We also had a penalty which was saved. So it's not like we just. I know the keeper didn't have the best games for them after the penalty save. Like 100% get that, but we put the pressure on and we tried. Tried to like come at them a bit and probably could have scored more in the first half on another day as well. So that gives me confidence that we can go. I think it was our first point against any of the teams in the playoffs, or when we played them in the playoffs, because we have beat Bristol City and Middlesbrough, but they weren't there when we played them. Um, yeah, so I think it will be a hard game for us. Don't get me wrong. Leeds, perhaps their form's fizzled off a little bit more than yours has. If anything, yours is probably picking back up. And I do think you've got some raw young players, as I mentioned earlier, that I don't know. Sometimes they're just on it, and you can't match that. I'm not saying Leeds haven't got good players because they have, but um, I don't know what it is about when Sunderland are on it. It just looks they just play well, and I can see that getting through our defense quite easily in a concerning way, enough to be quite comfortable in the game. I'm not saying you batter us like 6-0, but there'll be enough chances that you'll score enough goals to win the game, I think personally. So I'd probably say you'd probably score like two. Whether we can match that, then I'm not convinced that we will. I think as much as we scored two against Leeds, like we're not scoring loads of goals. We just scored one against Derby, but perhaps we'll probably be set up again hard to beat, I would imagine. So that's what the goal will be, to minimize how much we can concede and see if we can be a little bit more clinical in the chances that we can create, probably.
I'm going to go 1-0. We've won our last two games 1-0. Why not? It's
I
that
was going
kind
to
of
say,
season, isn't it?
I
It's
was going to
1-0
say
season.
2-1 Sunderland.
It's like 1-0, 2-1 season, isn't it, really?
Yeah,
It's
I
that
think every
point.
game in the championship last round was like 2-1 or 1-0. I think it was only 1-1 0-0, and no one had scored more than two, I think is what I saw.
Just that part of the season. By the way, if we do beat you 6-0, I will be clipping that voice note. I do apologize in advance. I know we've been friends for a few years now, but you can't blame me for that. But
I'll
Luke
just
always,
disappear.
please don't. I need someone on the preview
I'm only
show
joking.
if
It's
we
all
don't
right.
go
It's
up.
happened before, and I'm sure it'll happen again. We had this one lad who used to come on the podcast when we first started, and he hasn't appeared since because he was when Steve Cooper was in charge in his second season. And I believe at the time we were fighting for second place in the league, automatic promotion. I think we'd just beaten Norwich to like be pretty much there. And this was in January, going into the end of January. And we were going away to Huddersfield, who at the time were in a relegation battle. And I was like, 4-0. Never been more confident in my life. This is going to be easy, easy win. We're playing so well at the moment. We're flying up the table. We're fighting for automatic promotion. We lost the game 4-1.
We once had a preview guest who many people know it's almost infamous, and he's never been back since. And I really like the guy, bless him, but he predicted a 4-0 win once for a team that wears yellow and green, and we beat them 1-0 with Abdullah Bar scoring. So, yes, there we are. But Luke, always got to catch up, mate. I'm going to be on your
Yeah,
podcast. So, look, I'll tag everything into the link and stuff before if
yeah,
anyone
yeah.
wants to hear me chatting about Sunderland, which I suggest you don't. But you can listen to Luke talking about Swansea again. You can go and follow. But Luke, always got to catch up, mate. Cheers.
Yeah, always good to come. Thanks for having me back again. Always enjoy it.